Improve your English with powerful stories. Follow the subtitles, practice your listening, and dive into emotional journeys. Let's begin.
My name is Daniel, and for years, I painted the lives of strangers, not as they were, but as they could be. People came to me on the busy streets of the city, asking for portraits, expecting nothing more than a reflection of themselves. But when they saw my paintings, something changed. Some gasped, some cried. Others walked away in stunned silence, whispering about fate and destiny. They said I could paint the future. I never believed that. I told myself it was just coincidence, just intuition, nothing more than well-placed strokes and good timing. But now, looking back, I'm not so sure anymore. Because 2 months ago, something happened that forced me to question everything. A woman came to me with a request I had never heard before, and for the first time, I had to ask myself, what if they were right? 2 months ago, I was sitting at my usual spot on the street corner, my easel propped up, my brush gliding over the canvas. The city moved around me in a blur, cars honking, hurried footsteps, the scent of roasted coffee mixing with the cool morning air. But I barely noticed. My world existed within the strokes of paint, the soft drag of the brush against the canvas. A small crowd had gathered as I worked, their murmurs blending into background noise. The man in front of me shifted on his feet, watching as I added the final details to his portrait. With one last stroke, I set the brush down. His eyes widened when I turned the canvas toward him. "This is unbelievable," he breathed. I had heard that before. He ran his fingers along the edges of the painting, as if touching it would explain the unexplainable. "But how did you know? I just got my dream job yesterday." I shrugged. Lucky guess. The truth was, I didn't know. I never did. I just painted what I saw the way people could be, the way they should be. He paid me and left, still staring at the painting like it held secrets he wasn't sure he wanted to understand. Behind me, someone whispered, "They say he can paint the future." I ignored it. I didn't believe in such things. I only painted what I saw. Or, at least, that's what I told myself. 4 years ago, I was in a gallery, standing among polished floors and elegant guests murmuring over glasses of champagne. It was my night. My work a collection of surreal portraits, each one capturing people in ways even they didn't understand was being exhibited for the first time. I had waited for this moment my whole life, and then, in the span of a few sentences, it all unraveled. A voice cut through the chatter, sharp and deliberate. "These are nothing but illusions." The room went silent. I turned, my stomach twisting as I faced the man speaking, a well-known art critic. His gaze swept over my work, his lips curled in something close to amusement. "Dreams on canvas," he said, shaking his head. "No depth, no truth. Just fantasies pretending to be art." A low murmur spread through the crowd. The excitement, the admiration, it all faded, replaced by doubt, by whispers. By the end of the night, no one cared about my paintings anymore. That night, I walked out of the gallery humiliated. For months, I didn't touch a brush. When I finally did, it wasn't in a studio, it was on the streets, where expectations were lower, where no one questioned the truth behind my work, where I could convince myself that it was just paint, just luck, just a trick of the eye. 2 months ago, I was back in my usual spot, setting up my easel like I did every morning. The city hummed around me, alive with movement, but I barely noticed. I dipped my brush into the paint, ready for another ordinary day. That's when I saw her. She stood a few feet away, hesitant, her fingers gripping the strap of her purse like it was the only thing holding her together. Long auburn hair framed her tired face, and her eyes dark, uncertain, carried a weight I recognized. She wasn't like my usual customers. I glanced up. "Would you like a portrait?" She hesitated, shifting on her feet. "Not exactly." Her voice was soft, almost lost beneath the noise of the city. But something about the way she said it made me put my brush down. "What would you like me to paint?" I asked. She exhaled, looking down for a moment before meeting my gaze. A future where I'm happy. I froze. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. People came to me for reflections of who they were, not who they wished to be. I don't do that, I said, shaking my head. She sighed, the disappointment in her eyes cutting deeper than I expected. I understand, she murmured. Turning to leave, I should have let her go. Instead, before I could stop myself, I said, "Wait." She turned back, hope flickering for just a moment. I studied her face, the exhaustion, the doubt, the silent plea for something she wasn't sure she deserved. For reasons I couldn't explain, I reached for a blank canvas. "Sit down," I said. She did, and as I lifted my brush, something inside me shifted. I had spent years painting visions of other people. But as the strokes formed on the canvas, I realized I wasn't just painting for her. I was painting for the first time in a long, long while, and maybe, just maybe, for myself. 2 months ago, I sat there, painting the woman who had just asked me for something I had never been asked before, a version of herself she had never seen. She sat still as I worked, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes flicking between me and the canvas. I wasn't sure what I was painting, not at first. My brush moved instinctively, guided by something deeper than thought. Stroke by stroke, a version of her emerged on the canvas. Not the woman sitting before me, the one with slumped shoulders and tired eyes. No, this was different. This woman held her head high, her eyes alight with something strong, something unbreakable. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing your own worth. When I turned the canvas toward her, she inhaled sharply. Her fingers rose to her lips as if she wasn't sure whether to speak or cry. Her voice wavered. "This isn't me." I held her gaze. "Maybe not yet." She let out a breathless laugh, but there was no humor in it. Just disbelief. "She looks strong." She traced the edge of the painting with a trembling hand, like someone who knows where she's going. I nodded, but inside, my stomach twisted. Because the truth was, I didn't believe in this. Not really. I had spent years convincing myself that my paintings were just paintings. Just pigment and canvas, nothing magical, nothing meaningful. But this, I had painted something she couldn't see in herself. And that terrified me. She looked at me then, searching my face as if she could find the answer there. "You make it look so easy," she murmured. "Like I could just wake up tomorrow and be her." I forced a small smile. "It's just a picture," I said. "That's all." Her expression faltered, but she nodded. She reached into her purse, pulling out a few bills, and placed them beside my easel. "Thank you," she whispered. She hesitated for a moment, her lips parted like she wanted to say something more. But in the end, she just picked up the painting and walked away. I watched her disappear into the crowd, the weight of something unspoken pressing down on me. For years, I had painted beautiful futures for others. But why did it feel like I was the one seeing something for the first time? The days passed, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. I had painted hundreds of portraits before, people searching for something, people wanting to see themselves in a new light. But this was different, because for the first time, someone had asked for a future they couldn't see for themselves. And worst part of me had started to believe in it. I told myself it was nothing, just another painting, just another customer. But the thought wouldn't leave me. What if it was more than just paint? The idea made my chest tighten. Then, one afternoon, as I was setting up, I heard my name, Daniel. I turned. There she was. She stood in front of me, holding the painting against her chest like something precious. And she looked different. Her shoulders weren't as slumped. The heaviness in her eyes had lifted just a little. "I knew you'd be here," she said, offering a small, hesitant smile. I nodded, unsure what to say. She carefully unwrapped the painting and held it up beside her face. "I look more like her today," she said softly. "Not completely, but more." I swallowed hard. She ran a finger over the painted version of herself. At first, I didn't believe it. It felt like a lie. But then, I thought, what if I just tried? Her gaze met mine, and somehow, I started changing. I didn't know how to respond. For years, I had told myself my paintings were just that, paintings, coincidences, nothing more. But now, standing in front of me, was proof that I had been wrong. She smiled. I think your paintings are more than you realize. My throat felt tight. I wanted to argue, tell her it wasn't me, it was her. She had found that strength within herself. But deep down, I knew, if her painting had changed her, then what had I been running from all these years? She placed a gentle hand on the canvas. Thank you, she whispered, and then she was gone. I stared at the empty space where she had stood, my pulse pounding in my ears. For the first time in years, I wondered, what would happen if I painted my own future? That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the dust-covered canvas in the corner. For years, I had ignored it, pretended it didn't exist. I told myself I didn't need it, that painting for others was enough, that my own future wasn't worth imagining. But now, I wasn't so sure. I stood, walking toward it slowly, my heart pounding. My hands hovered over the sheet for a moment before I gritted my teeth and pulled it away. Dust swirled in the air, revealing a painting I had abandoned long ago, a self-portrait. It wasn't finished, my eyes were incomplete, the strokes hesitant, uncertain. I had stopped midway, too afraid to complete the version of myself I had once believed in. Because the man in that painting, he had dreams, he had hope, and I had let that version of me die. I swallowed hard, dragging the canvas onto my easel. My fingers twitched over my paintbrush. What was I supposed to paint? For years, I had created visions of other people, versions of themselves they couldn't yet see. But now, I had to ask myself a terrifying question: who did I want to be? My mind whispered back, cold and doubtful, you don't know. My grip tightened on the brush. I had to know. I dipped the brush into the paint and pressed it to the canvas, a stroke, then another. I didn't think, I just painted, piece by piece. The image took shape. Hours passed, the world outside fading away, until finally I stepped back. My breath caught. There, staring back at me, was a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. Not the man from the past, not the man who had given up. No, this was someone else. Someone standing in a bright gallery, surrounded by people who admired his work. Someone strong, someone certain, someone who still had a future. And for the first time in years, I felt something shift deep inside me. Hope. And maybe, just maybe, I finally believed in the picture I had painted. 2 months ago, I painted a version of myself I had forgotten existed. This morning, I woke up to the scent of drying paint still clinging to the air. My fingers were stained with color, a silent reminder of what I had done the night before. I sat up slowly, my eyes drifting toward the canvas. There I was, painted in bold, confident strokes, standing tall, certain, in a gallery, a future I had never dared to imagine for myself. For years, I had told myself that my art was just art, that my paintings were nothing more than coincidence. But, if that were true, then why did I feel different now? Why did this feel possible? I didn't have the answer, but I knew one thing. I had spent too long hiding from my own potential. It was time to step into my own painting. 2 months later, I stood inside that gallery. The room buzzed with quiet conversation, the clinking of glasses, the soft shuffle of footsteps against polished floors. My paintings lined the walls, illuminated by warm golden light. People moved from one piece to another, studying them, discussing them. And this time, no one was whispering about illusions. No one was scoffing. They were seeing. And for the first time, I stood among them not as a street artist, not as a man painting for survival, but as someone who belonged. I had made it here. I had painted this moment into existence. Daniel, the familiar voice made me turn. She was there, The woman from the street. But she wasn't the same. She stood taller now, her eyes no longer clouded with exhaustion. There was something light about her, something alive. I smiled. I was hoping you'd come. She glanced around at the paintings, then back at me. I told you, she said. Your paintings are more than just paintings. I let out a quiet laugh. And I think you always had happiness in you, even when you couldn't see it yet. For a moment, there was nothing but understanding between us, the people who had found something they had once thought lost. Then, a voice called from the crowd, "Daniel, can I have a moment?" A curator gestured for me to come over, excitement in his expression. I glanced at her. "Stay for a while," she nodded. And as I turned, stepping forward into the life I had once thought impossible, I realized something. For years, I had painted hope for others, never daring to claim it for myself. But now, I no longer just painted the future, I was living it.
Thank you so much for joining me today and practicing your English with this powerful story. I hope it inspired you and reminded you of the strength we all have to overcome challenges. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear this story. Your support means the world to me. Remember, every story has the power to change us. Keep practicing your English, keep growing, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care and keep learning.